Good afternoon and welcome to the Planning Committee meeting here tonight. My name is Councillor Gary Marsh. To my left is my Vice Chairman, Councillor Philip Coote. To his left are the two legal officers. To my right is Steve King, the Senior Planning Officer. To his right is Catherine, who's going to be doing the outline of the planning meeting we've got to do, i.e. the reports. In front of me are the members of the committee, and to the left and the right are democratic services who shall be taking the minutes and working this marvellous equipment. Before we go any further, can I ask the Vice Chairman to read out the safety?
Thank you, Chairman.
Press the button.
Hussein Bouton. Good afternoon, everyone. Beg your pardon. The building fire alarm signal is a continuous two-tone alarm. On hearing the evacuation alarm, 1, leave the building by the nearest marked exit. 2, follow the green signs to the assembly point, large staff car park opposite the entrance to the building. 3, anyone who cannot use the stairs will be helped by the officers present after the people have left. 4, do not return to the building until you're told it's safe to do so and by an authorised officer. The whole of the council's site is of no smoking area. Filming from the public gallery is permitted, but members must please refrain from filming within the council chamber so as not to distract the meeting. Mobile phones, please, must be switched either off or to silent. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chairman. Members, before we start the proceedings today, following the desperately sad loss of Edward Belsey, as a mark of respect, please stand with me and observe 1 minute of silence, please. Thank you, Terry. All right, we'll go back to the agenda now. Item 1 on the agenda is to receive apologies for absence. I have Councillor Webb and Councillor Eggleston. Members, can I ask both Councillor Eggleston today, I think it was a short term, I wasn't feeling very well moment. If you do send your apologies to me, which is good, but can you possibly copy in the Democratic Services committees as well, please? Because they do have to do a crib sheet, and it's better if they get copied into anybody who can't make it as well. Thank you. Item 2 is to receive declarations of interest in respect of any matter on the agenda. Members who wish to do, can you click on your button to say you wish to speak? I actually do have one, so does my Vice Chairman, and I know Councillor Sweatman is probably the same one as me. On the first item of the agenda, the substantive part of the agenda, I was part of the planning committee that gave permission for the site in Franklin's Village, but it was only it's like almost like a public service. We've not got any prejudicial things. We look at this afresh, and so thank you, Councillor Sweatman.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Yes, I'm the same as you on that one.
You were Vice Chairman?
Yeah, I was Vice Chairman, I think. Yeah.
Just to say, Chairman, that I'm exactly the same as yourself. I sat on the committee that originally gave permission for this.
Councillor Pulfer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to say that I will, if I may, Mr. Chairman, speak, but just as of awareness, so I don't have to declare it, but I'm also on the planning committee of the town council.
And you'll be speaking as ward councillor
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
on this one, yeah?
Yes, thank
And
you.
you then will leave the chamber.
I will indeed, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you.
You will exclude me.
Yes, thank you very much. Item 3 is to confirm the minutes of the committee held on that marathon we did last month on the 13th of October. Do we agree with that? Can you just... Oh, hang on a sec. Sorry, we got to do the voting as we normally would do. Forgive me, I was at the National Park and they just do agree.
Mr. Chairman, I have apologies for that because it's I can't vote on this.
No, you can't. You abstain. Can you just put the abstain? Yeah.
Registered.
And we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So I've got one of them. Is it me or was it Philip?
You didn't register, I've got the finger on it.
That's it?
That's it. You want to do it once?
As you can see, Zach, do you want to read out the?
Sure. That's 8 in favour and 2 abstentions. The minutes should be confirmed.
Thank you, and I'll sign them accordingly. Just for members of the public why the 2 members have abstained, because both Councillor Brown and Councillor DeBell weren't here at that. Yeah, so you were here, weren't you? Yes, you were. Sorry. Right, thank you. Councillor Cartwright, I knew there was somebody else, so thank you. Item 4 is to consider any items I agree to take as urgent business. I have none. So we go to the substantial part of the meeting tonight. There is in the agenda update sheet regarding this as well. And Mr. King, now this is yours.
Right, yeah, thank you, Chairman, sorry about that. A couple of things on the update sheet. Extra paragraph regarding accessibility to be added to the report, page 28, page 30, an extra couple of lines regarding neighbour amenity. As a correction to a typo regarding the education contribution on page 39. And just as a final update, the applicants have now confirmed that their intention is to use air source heat pumps, as you see on the update sheet. So suggesting a additional planning condition just to cover that, that issue. And the applicants continue to use PV panels on the flat roof part of the building. So that's it in terms of updates, Chairman.
Thank you.
So just to run through the application. So the application seeks full planning permission for the erection of 24 two-bed flats contained in 2 buildings on a site within Franklin's Village. This is the application site here, outlined in red on the screen, with additional car parking outlined in here to the north. I'll go through it later in the presentation, but the planning history is important on this application, and that's set out on pages 19 and 20 of the report. And it's important because this scheme is very similar to a scheme that the District Council has previously approved. And you'll see in the report that that previous scheme, referenced DM 18 4118, was reported to the Planning Committee in December 2018, and members resolved to approve the scheme, and it was then subsequently approved following the completion of the legal agreement. And you'll also see in the planning history, and again it's relevant to what's before us, that original 2018 planning permission was subsequently amended to remove the requirement to provide 30% affordable housing on site, because the applicants had demonstrated that the scheme wasn't viable to do that. And you'll see in the report that a subsequent Section 73 application was approved under reference DM 24114, and that amended the legal agreement to require a payment towards off-site affordable housing provision, together with a viability review mechanism in the 106, and that's the same as is now proposed on this current application. So it's just to be aware of that. So in terms of planning policy and constraints, the whole of the site is within the conservation area, and this plan just shows the areas of ancient woodland that are around the site in the dark hashed green, with the lighter area around in the 15-metre buffer that we apply for ancient woodland. The application site itself is outside of the 15-metre buffer zone. So these are the existing and proposed block plans. So what's proposed on the site is 2 blocks of flats, Block A and Block B. I think as members will know, there's a very sharp fall in levels through the site from east to west. To the north, there's a footpath that runs across here, and then the area here is wooded. The road is a private road. At this point, it's one way, southbound, and then at this point here, just outside number 99, there's a sort of mini roundabout, and the road beyond that point becomes two-way. Opposite the site at a higher level, you've got a block of flats, woodside, 3.5 stories high, with parking to the front. Charles Bennett Court across to the southeast, it's 2-storey flatted development. And then semi-detached houses to the south that are typical of the Frankness village. Number of trees on the boundaries and then a rise up in levels, trees, and then housing further across to the west. So just in terms of the application in a bit more detail, the scheme is described on page 21 of the report. So 6 planning permission for 24 2-bedroom flats in 2 blocks, A and B. The blocks would be 3.5 stories high when viewed from the rear, but 2.5 when viewed from the front. And that's because of the sharp fall in levels that we'll see in the subsequent slides. And it's proposed that their dwellings or the flats would be of a traditional design, fairly similar to the flats opposite. It's proposed to have 24 car parking spaces in front of the flats and across here. So that's 1 space per flat, together with cycle and refuse stores in separate blocks to the front of the building. That just shows the front elevation of Block A, so fairly traditional materials to try and fit in with the prevailing character of the conservation area. So that's the rear elevation of Block A, so you can see much taller because of the step down in levels through the site. side elevation of Block A, so you can see the step down, so road level up here. Need steps down into the entrance on the frontage, and in effect a split level building, and that's the other side elevation of Block A. In terms of floor plans, that's the lower ground floor, so you've got proposed patio areas to be accessed to the rear for those flats. Upper ground floor, so that's the entrance to come into the site again, patio areas at the front for those units. Proposed first floor plan, and then the rooms in the roof. It's just a plan that shows section through the site, so you can see the substantial fall in levels. So these are the flats on the opposite side of the road. 99 Ripon Walk, the house there, and then the site sloping down to the west. And again, just another section showing, again, the difference in levels through the site. There's the refuse and cycle stores to be located towards the front of the buildings. That's similar for Block B. It's referenced in the report. There will be some minimal tree removal. It's just the ones highlighted in purple, all category C trees. So some down here on the corner and a couple up here, but the majority of trees on the boundary would all be retained to the north, west, and the south. And that's just a proposed 3D visual to give an idea of the proposed flats and what they would look like in real life. So you can see the flats at a lower level than the road. That's number 99. They're the flats opposite, directly opposite at a higher level. These slides show the difference, or the fact that there isn't really a great deal of difference between the previously approved application and the current application. So on the left-hand side, that's the previously approved proposal, 2 blocks, 24 car parking spaces to the front, and this is the current application. So in terms of the layout, car parking provision, it's basically the same. Previously approved front and rear elevations for Block A. So the only significant difference is the insertion of 2 additional dormer windows on the frontage here. But other than that, again, you can see basically it's the same design as was previously approved. And the same for the side elevation, Block A, and the same thing for Block B. So again, that's previously approved and current application. The difference really is the 2 dormer windows. Rear elevation basically the same still. And just some photos from the site. I'm sure members are more familiar with it. So this is taken from towards the bottom end of the slope, looking upwards, and that's number 99. So you can see the trees in the background. Again, looking up the slope to the flats opposite. It's looking down towards the site, so that's 99. That's the roundabout feature, and the site is over here. That's 99, and that's the boundary treatment at the moment. Again, some views, so that's looking northwards along Ripon Walk, which is one way at this point. This is the application site here and beyond here, so this is the car parking for the flats opposite. It's a slightly longer view of the application site, and again, application site down there. And this is looking back up, so these are the flats opposite. You can see at a much higher level with their car parking to the front, and just another view looking down into the site. So if I go back to the layout plans. In terms of the issues, they are set out in the report, so I won't labour them in too much detail, other than just to flag that the main points up. The principle of the developments dealt with on page 24 of the report. It's in the built-up area. Planning permission has been previously granted for a very similar scheme, so the principle of the site, developing the site, accords with the development plan. It's been found to be acceptable in the past, and we still believe that to be the case. Design matters are dealt with on page 25 of the report. You see from the presentation the minimal changes to the design from the previously approved scheme, which was found to be acceptable. And again, we consider that that still applies now, that the design is satisfactory and in keeping with the conservation area. That's dealt with on page 28 of the committee report. You'll see that the conservation officer is content with the application. Neighbour amenity, that's dealt with on page 30 of the committee report. For the reasons that are set out, we don't feel that there would be any significant harm arising from the proposal. And again, it's the same issues as on the previously approved scheme. I think one of the main issues that's been raised on this application relates to transport matters, and that's dealt with on page 31 of the report. You'll see that the Highway Authority have no objections to the scheme. There's certainly been no highway capacity issues arising from the development, and the Highway Authority have no issues with the change, with the roundabout being removed. That's the same as on the previously consented scheme. One of the main issues relates to the level of car parking on the site, and of the representations have focused on that. The scheme is proposing 1 space per unit, so 24 car parking spaces, which, as the report acknowledges, is lower than the county standard of 32 spaces. But as members will know, if there is a parking shortfall against the standards, that still has to be found to generate some planning harm if for an application to be resisted on those grounds. You'll see that the Highway Authority don't consider that there would be any harm arising from this level of car parking provision. And of course, the key point that I've gone back to before is that this level of parking is the same as on the previously approved scheme, and that was approved under the same development plan, so the district plan and the Haywards Heath neighbourhood plan. So the development plan is exactly the same. National policy hasn't changed to warrant a different view being formed on the car parking provision. And you'll see towards the end of the report that I'll come to, that consistency is important in the planning process, but I'll come on to that. Drainage, that's dealt with on page 34, and you'll see the drainage engineer has no issues with the scheme. I've mentioned the trees that would be removed. That's dealt with on page 35. 4 groups of grade C trees, and there's no objection to the tree officer from that. In terms of biodiversity matters, that's dealt with on page 36. No protected species likely to be affected. The scheme is outside the 15-metre ancient woodland buffer zone, and you'll see that the council's ecological consultants recommended a number of conditions regarding biodiversity matters, and we're satisfied with those in place. There's no issue there. The affordable housing, as I mentioned at the start of the report, the application is proposing a payment for off-site provision which is exactly the same provisions as was secured in the original application as subsequently amended. So the housing officer is content with that in place, and an advanced stage review mechanism were there to be a surplus generated that could then go towards additional off-site affordable housing provision. So in conclusion, for all the reasons that are set out in the report, the application is considered to comply with the development plan. It is very similar, as I've said, to the previously approved scheme, and the fact that there is that previously approved scheme is a material consideration that the planning committee should have regard to in determining the application for the reasons that are set out in the report. I think that's all I need to say, Chairman. Thank you.
I'm going to call Mr. Stefano Hawkins. If you'd like to come to here, and I'll explain the public speaking procedure. When you start to speak, the legal officer will put on our traffic light system. It will go to green. That gives you 90 seconds, and then it will go to amber. That gives you 30 seconds left. And when it goes to red, I'll ask you to conclude in one sentence. Thank you. So when you start, the lights will go on.
Good afternoon. Many thanks for hearing us out this afternoon. My objections today are around disturbance to neighbours, workers and sustainable location for this development. So my main concern is the size of the development in the area detailed up on the screen there. To be absolutely clear, as a resident of Woodside, we are not opposed to the whole development, more so the actual size of development. We would be not opposed to one block of flats rather than two, because this means a reduction in the sheer amount of people and cars already in a highly congested Franklin's Village around that one-way system. The site will cause major disturbance to the neighbours during and after construction. At Woodside alone, there are emergency service workers, fire, myself, police and nurses all working shifts who already struggle to park outside of hours and returning overnight and early hours in the morning. We can expect road blockages on the one-way system due to building traffic, slowing emergency services workers, some of whom, like myself, respond to alerters at the call of a 999 call. And getting to their respective places of work will be a challenge even harder than it is currently. As it is, parking is extremely limited, and other services such as delivery drivers and supermarket delivery drivers already cause major problems when they stop on the one-way system and block people from getting out, which I myself has experienced getting out from Woodside, out past the Mulberries and out of Franklin's Village. We have a necessity of cars here in Woodside. Public transport is not an option in terms of our working lives. Even those who travel to the standard 9-to-5 job to London cannot use the bus service to even get to Haywards Heath Station, as they run an extremely limited service out of Franklin's Village. On count at Woodside alone, we have 18 cars needed out of necessity, out of a 12-flat block, that people need to get to and from work, and that's not considering the cars people need for leisure, and any space for visitors, or any sort of visitors for health-related issues. And to remove... Yes. Absolutely. And as such, removing the parking outside the front would have significant impact personally to people living at Woodside and all the surrounding residents of Franklin's Village.
Alex Beck, please. The same to apply. As soon as you start to speak, the green light will come on.
Thank you very much for hearing me out. Just before as well, I just want to highlight one main difference from the previous application that was approved, which is now the Woodside development is fully resided. So there's a lot of difference in traffic and people around there. With the lack of new car parking spaces being created, where are the potential 48 additional cars going to park on an already overpopulated Franklin's Village? We see a daily occurrence of people parking on hashed lines and on the turning circle, which is proposed to be removed, and delivery drivers blocking the highway. On this point, where do you expect delivery drivers, including lorries for bulky and heavy items such as removals, to stop in lengthy periods of time without blocking the new one-way system? The site will be an overdevelopment of an already overpopulated private village. 12 blocks of 12 flats can expect to bring at least 48 people who will bring traffic and disturbances. Looking at the entire road layout, it's going to change due to the removal of the turning circle, and that will make the whole one-way system much longer. I've witnessed already delivery drivers and some residents go the wrong way around the system, causing a danger to the highways. This is only going to be exaggerated by the lengthening of that. We also have concern about the amount of parking spaces don't meet the requirements set out by the council, and they are using existing parking spaces used by residents, visitors, delivery drivers, emergency services to meet the demand for the new flats. It is also acknowledged that in the Woodside development, it acknowledged that there wasn't enough parking for the current residents. However, there was residual parking opposite, which will be further taken up by the new development. It would emphasise at the local council meeting that I attended that all contractors, builders, cranes, materials and deliveries had to be kept within the boundary of the site to avoid disruption to residents. I fail to see how this is possible on the scale of the site and the size of the build. I'll sum up. We urge you to consider how this will be an overdevelopment and that potentially reducing the size of development will have a better effect on existing residents and the village.
Can I ask Daniel Frisbee, who's speaking in support of this application, please?
Here on behalf of the applicants. As you've heard from Steve, this planning application relates to a site within the built-up area boundary, has previously benefited from a number of consensus residential development. The application is substantively the same as previously permitted by this committee in 2018, and it will result in the effective use of a vacant site to provide much needed housing in accordance with both national and local planning policy, which are both as they were when this site was originally written in 2018. Any alterations to the previous scheme are relatively minor in nature, but nonetheless are a material enhancement in terms of the additional provision of EV charging points to the parking spaces, and the applicant's commitment to now use air source heat pumps for water and space heating. In addition, a number of minor design improvements are made, including the provision of new and larger areas of private amenity space, which will be a benefit to new residents of the units. It is acknowledged that there are some concerns about parking. However, it's because that level of parking provision is appropriate in this location, given its good accessibility of facilities by means other than motor vehicle. Noted that the Highway Authority have no objection to proposals in relation to parking or any other highway matters. And Franklin's Village Housing Association, who own and manage the wider estate, are fully supportive of these proposals and have in fact written in support of the proposals. The Covenant is committed to a plan-led system of development. Therefore, the fact that this proposal would result in the provision of housing within the built-up area should be afforded significant positive weight in the planning balance. And this is for all those reasons that the development is considered to be a sustainable policy compliance scheme, and I trust that you will endorse your office's recommendation. Thank you.
Very much. Now, for the members and to the wider audience watching on YouTube, if there are any, I'm going to ask Councillor Rod Clark, who's the local ward councillor, to speak. Now, Councillor Clark is actually not timed, but he is aware, don't try the patience of the committee.
Okay. First of all, good afternoon, and thank you, Chairman, for letting me to speak to your committee and address your committee. You've heard from some residents, you've had a lot of written reports from residents, and I'm not going to go over some of the things they've just gone over on parking. I think they've covered that well. And you'll be hearing from Councillor Pulford next. I do apologise if I get some jargon, some planning jargons wrong, because I'm not on the planning committee, so do be patient with me. But although this previous site had planning permission, I believe it might have been a mistake, and I feel guilty of not being at that first committee and objecting to it on different grounds to what we've heard already. This is a green, I see this as a green corridor of Hayward Heath. It goes from the Princess Royal, opposite the Princess Royal, down through, you've seen this on the plan, through the back of Franklin's Village, down past the graveyard, past some other sites. It goes on through to the Scrace Valley Nature Reserve. So I see this as a very important green corridor which we're losing, and this development will eat into it. I was also very concerned that on the ecological appraisal report, it said that the site had been cleared before they had done their report. I'll just make that point there. Also, the report on the lighting, they'll come back to the council for planning for lighting for these flats on the outside. Now, I believe these flats, 24 of them, which has been increased from the 18, you will not be able to tell people who live in those flats to turn their lights off. So the impact those lights will have on that green corridor, and I just want to, this is from the official reports, the surrounding woodland is high in strict, I can't say the word, intrinsic value, much of which is listed as ancient woodland inventory. It is also likely to support a number of protected species, including breeding birds, roosting bats, and also is an important wildlife corridor for species. So although they may not have found anything on that site, that eats into the corridor, which links all our nature reserves and green spaces all the way through to Scrace Valley. So I feel very strongly that this has not been looked at and talked about. Then I'll move on to, do bear with me. So I wanted to mention the outside lights. I've mentioned that, and there is a report on the outside lights there. We can, and I'd like to also bring to the attention of which was mentioned earlier by the planning officer, the drainage report, which was okay, but at the end of the drainage report, due to the past slippage and landslides, including several houses falling into that valley, which was on the other side of the road and slid into the valley. The developers were asked suggested by our officer, that a third-party geotechnical engineer report is recommended. Now, I don't know if that's been carried out. I just wanted to mention that. Okay. And my final point was I was going to talk about the affordables, but I heard what the officer said about the affordables. But I do believe the application was 5 years ago, it was passed, and then it ran out. I believe this is a new application, and it's gone from 18 to 24. I'm very disappointed in the amount of not 106 or affordable houses, because is this a piecemeal development where they built the flats on the other side, now they build these flats, and it's another one where this council is missing out, and our residents are missing out, and the people who need affordable houses are missing out. So from that point, I think I was very disappointed on the affordable. And I don't think 47,000 might build a conservatory. I understand our officers will go back and keep an eye on it, and I understand the process, so I'm not querying that process. And I'd just like to say that I feel that the green corridors are so important to this town and to the residents. It's not just the residents that live next to it, it's all our residents, and it's the wildlife. And I think all these reports saying it's okay or maybe okay, it's not. That will affect that valley. Those lights will go into the valley and affect that wildlife. And I'd like to leave it there. And thank you very much for listening to me. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I'm going to call councillor Pulfer now. Could you vacate your seat from there, please? Now, councillor Pulfer is going to speak as ward councillor, so he's accorded the same respect as councillor Clark just had. He can speak, but he does sit on this committee. He now knows that we will not tolerate war and peace. Because he does sit on this committee, I have asked him to leave after legal advice. He has to leave the chamber once he's finished his bit. Councillor Pulfer.
Do I press the button? The green one? Just carry on. Mr. Chairman, thank you, and committee members, thank you very much. As you know, because I wrote in and objected to it in a separate manner, I'm prejudged on this application, so I'm unable to vote. But this is not the first time that this application has been put before this planning committee. And indeed, some of the participants here today will have approved the past application, as the chairman very fairly pointed out. However, this is an entirely new application, and with the new information to hand, I'm hoping that you will approach this new application on an unbiased and unprejudiced manner. You will have heard from residents and Councillor Clark. You will also have heard from those speakers that this is not an objection. It's about the size and the overdevelopment and the loss of parking. There are several comments in here which concern the well-being of the residents and parking, but my objection is that the support of the residents is centred on these two issues, being the overdevelopment, and it will have a meaningful effect on local residents. I believe it is disingenuous by not providing affordable accommodation for local people, because if we look at the Franklin's Village Association's motto, it is just that, to provide affordable housing. But instead, we have a situation here where we're being suggested that £47,000 will be sufficient to make up for the substantial shortfall in social housing, which is desperately needed in Haywards Heath. If I can just draw, and what I'm going to do, councillors, if you will bear with me, it's just so that we can all stay on the same page without ducking and diving through the application. I just want to draw to your attention, for instance, on page 15, on the third paragraph up, just the first line, which I think is really important. It says, whilst it's clearly the case that each planning application must be determined on its individual merits, and I'm sure that that is what you will do. You will have read on page 18 the observations of the Town Council, and effectively that's why I made you very aware that I was part of that decision-making progress. If we were to turn to page 20, I just want to draw to your attention to a number of things, and regrettably, I don't think we have the benefit of Google Maps, do we, Mr. King? We do? I wonder if you could be kind enough just to put it up, because I think that it would show you, in particular, what I'm getting at. Because there are two sections to Franklin's Village, for those who are not familiar with it, and that is that there's a one-way section which has been mentioned, and from the roundabout up the balance of Reed Pond Walk up to the little corner shop, there is a double carriageway, but it is not full width, so that if you drive a car up there, you can just open your door without touching the cars which are already on street parking. And on Google Earth, it would show you cars where they are effectively have to park because there is not any off-street parking. For those residents, they need to drive down to their parking from the corner shop, and they need the turning circle at the bottom to turn around and go back upwards. Otherwise, they have got to reverse somewhere between 100 and 150 yards to get back out onto the main drag out of Franklin's Village. I very much doubt whether any of those residents have a clue about this application and the main effect on it, on them. Because it's not impossible to do I say a 3-point turn to demonstrate what I'm saying. It would effectively be a 16-point turn, and on both sides of the road there are bollards to make sure that nobody leaves the carriageway. So are we expecting the white van driver, the DHL driver, UPS to walk 150 yards with a parcel because they have no chance of ever getting out? So I'm just drawing your attention, councillors, to that part on page 50, where if the detriment to the residents there, if the roundabout is removed. If we were to go on to, and you'll be delighted to see that I'm skipping through to page 26, the policy states, I would suggest, councillors, that is highly subjective. And I'll leave it there. On page 31, the fourth bullet point following to meet these objections, it says the scheme provides adequate car parking for the proposed development, taking into account. That, councillors, is only achieved by removing 13 parking spaces which are already there. Where are those residents going to park their cars? I came at 15:30 this afternoon, I checked it out again. There are only 6 car parking spaces free at 15:30. In other words, people have not come home from work, There are 6 parking spaces available within 0.2 of a mile of this application. We've already heard that we've got part-time people and shift workers. And also, some of these residents here are the salt of the earth tradesmen. So when they come back at 5 o'clock, where are they going to park their vans? Are they expected to go down to the middle of Haywards Heath, park in the Sussex Road car park? Where are they going to park? And in fact, there's comment made on that on page 32, the last paragraph, where it says that effectively that the comments I've just made are to be dismissed because apparently there is not a problem. And I contest that, councillors. I contest that. I'm delighted to see there are 2 EV parking spots in there from day one. Excellent news, but I suspect that all that does do initially is reduce the parking, because I have driven around Franklin's Village twice and I have seen but one of all the cars there is to being electric. So I'm not looking at a big take-up other than ordinary cars. On biodiversity, page 35, I live, I don't know, in a straight line, 750 metres away. I have bats, and yet there is no comment in here about a bat survey. In an area like that, which is heavily populated in trees, there must be bats, and I would recommend that there is a bat survey. If we were to just go to page 39, there's a contribution. I'm on page 39, Chairman, so, I am getting there. It would be nice if to see some sort of contribution to the country park, which presumably the people in the flats would be very like to take use of. So to sum up, councillors, you can see what I perceive is the main problem. How could we solve this? We could solve it by passing an application which would have, as in Brighton, no cars. That would solve a problem. They'd still have vehicles. But if we approve this application, councillors, be aware that, in my view, it will cause both local to new and old untold misery, and even worse, contention amongst residents for parking spaces, both during the evening and at weekends, and it will go for time immemorial. Councillors, Mr. Chairman, thank you for your time.
I think a round of applause would be, but I won't. I won't say that. Thank you, Councillor Pulford. Can I ask you just to vacate, please? Members, both the ward councillors and the public speakers who are against this have raised some concerns. I've asked Mr. King to address, I think it's 4 of them you got there.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Yeah, thank you. Just to go through some of those points that have been raised. In terms of the planning condition regarding lighting, that's directed at external lighting that might be on the building and the surrounding pathways, etc. So it's obviously not directed at anything internal to the building. And with that condition in place, the council's ecological consultant is content that there is no problem in relation to bats that may migrate across the site. Clearly, if the independent ecologist that gets consulted on these applications felt there was a problem, then they would say so. But they haven't. They've said recommended planning conditions to address that point. I think there was a general query about the slope and stability, etc. I think that it's clearly the case that there is a very substantial slope across that site, and it will require very careful engineering, and there is a condition number 4 requiring a slope stability report to be submitted to the council before works would commence, because it is on a substantial slope and there have been problems in this locality in the past, I'm sure members are aware of. I think Councillor Pulford mentioned on page 15 that the sentence that each planning application must be determined on its individual merits, which is, of course, absolutely right. But the sentence obviously then goes on to say that it is also well established that previous permissions and consents are capable of immaterial planning considerations, meaning that they may need to be taken into account when you're determining a subsequent application on the same site, essentially for something similar, which is what we have here. The general question regarding car parking on the site remains the same as it was back in 2018, and I come back to the point that where there is a scheme that has a lower level of car parking than the council standards, that in itself doesn't mean that the applications are unacceptable. You then have to look at, is there any planning harm that arises from that level of provision? And it was found back in 2018 that there was no harm arising from that. And I don't think that there has been any change on the ground that would lead to a different conclusion being reached on that issue now. As I've said, the planning policy and the development plan remains the same as it was back in 2018. So unless circumstances have changed on the ground, I think it would be very difficult for officers to argue an appeal situation, for example, if the application was refused on matters relating to car parking. What's the change since 2018? And I think we would be very much struggling to substantiate that as a reason for refusal. I think those were the the main points I've got down, unless I've missed any, Chairman.
Okay, I'm going to ask the legal officer to give us a definition. Said regarding, it was on page 15, the fact that we did give planning permission this on the 13th of December 2018. It is a material consideration. Could you just reiterate to the committee, please?
Sure, thank you, Chairman. Yes, the committee is not bound by its previous decision. However, the committee is obliged to take reasonable steps to ensure that all its decisions remain consistent, especially in cases of the same kind. I think the officer has set out the legal position on page 42 and 43.
It's the last paragraph. Yeah, I think members ought to have a read of that before we start the debate. And while you're reading it, as always, can I ask members to be succinct? And also, if it's not in the report, unless it's material consideration, I don't really want to hear about it. Thank you. I've got a couple of speakers, but I'm just going to ask a couple of questions myself before we go open the debate, because I think it's important that we do this in light of one of the objectors, and it's the construction management phase. And if you go to condition 5 on page 44, and it's the, I saw it, it's the routing of the route, yeah, God knows how many bullet points down. It's the provision of loading and unloading the plant materials and the route thereafter it gets to it. I know we've got to have a construction management phase of that part of it. I visited the site just on Tuesday, and the objectors were very correct, and as were both ward councillors. That road is a bit narrow when you're in the one-way system. Can we, because they're going to have to come in that way, because they're not going to be able to turn around. And it's just where we're going to park them. Are they going to be parked on the site? Mr. King.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Well, clearly those are details that would have to come forward in the construction management plan, and I think everyone who's been there will have seen the condition of the site, the one-way system, the width of the roads, etc., and it is what it is. So the applicants were planning permission to be granted. In discharging that condition, they will have to be mindful of the condition of the site and the type of vehicles that are going to be able to access that site, and how they might have to carry out some temporary engineering works at the frontage to accommodate plant and materials, etc., off the highway. I fully accept that it is a challenging site to build because of where it is in a residential area, with a one-way street accessing it and so on. But I think that in itself isn't a reason to refuse a planning permission. There are lots of difficult sites to access and develop up and down the district, up and down the country. And as you saw from the photographs, there's a relatively new block of flats opposite the site that was been built in the last few years. So that has been constructed relatively recently, and I don't doubt that this site could also be constructed as well. It will just require quite a bit of forethought and planning from the applicants when they come to discharge that planning condition, because as I said, the site is difficult to get to.
Yeah, okay. Well, you just mentioned that. You just mentioned that new development opposite. Does that come into the material consideration? Because the block of flats was delivered in 2019, with the previous planning permission occupied in the past year. Will that materially change what was raised on page 15, the block of flats opposite with additional parking, because that wasn't there when we gave planning permission in 2018. I'm sorry, members, this is part of the debate, but I think we need to set the ground rules and see where we're at on this one, because it is important on this.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's the planning history.
This is opposite the site,
Yeah.
not the site that we're
Yeah,
talking
so
about.
if we go to page 20, second paragraph, that refers to when planning permission was granted for that block of flats on the opposite side of the road. So I think that was March
It was before,
2018.
yeah.
And obviously the previous planning application on this site went to committee in December 2018. So obviously the one opposite was first.
Yeah, I agree. I'm just wanting to make sure we tick all the boxes. And one other final thing before we open it to debate is Councillor Pulf requested, and I don't know if we can do this as a committee, the section 106 for community infrastructure, could it be allocated towards the country park? Because all the others have got specific locations for it, where the money's going to go to. Could we say that goes to there?
Yeah, I don't think there's an issue with that. I did note that the town council had requested that in their comments, so I've made the council solicitor that's dealing with the 106 aware of that request, but I don't think there's any problem in doing that, Chairman.
Right, okay, we're going to open it to debate now. I've had my bit. Councillor Coote, my vice chairman, please.
Well, thank you, Chairman. I don't have any problem with the construction. When I was in the construction industry, I've worked in Bond Street, in Mayfair, and we've had to lift stuff over the roof. There's always a way around to construct it, and so long as the contractors get on with it and they don't turn up on site at 8 o'clock in the morning and have half an hour for breakfast and disappear at 2 o'clock, then the job can be up and done and out of the way. What does concern me, and I really seriously am concerned, is the parking. In my own area, my own constituency, we have a situation at a weekend when there are so many cars on the road and parked on the pavement, parked here, parked there. It is impossible. And the problem here is that if we give planning permission with the current parking spaces, there are going to be social problems in the future. Somebody's going to come home. We've heard from a gentleman who's a fireman. He's going to want to get out. Somebody's had to park in front of his house. He's going to say, get out of the way. The other gentleman's going to use some bad language. And you've got neighbours at loggerheads. And that's down to us, Chairman. So, as far as I could see from the drawings, there appears to be a flying freehold. So could we go back to the drawings of the buildings, please?
What do you want?
The elevations. No, that's it. Now, is that an access to the back garden?
What, between the two buildings?
Yes, it looks like a flying freehold to me. Yes, it is. Then I cannot understand why the contractor, in his wisdom, doesn't put some more parking spaces in there. After all, we are entering a period now of seriously difficult sales for properties. And so any property that's coming on the market needs to be, it needs to have everything, all the boxes ticked. And it's ridiculous to provide a block of flats like this with purely parking for those residents, one per flat. Now, if there's a married couple in there, they're likely to have 2 cars. And what do they do when mum and dad come to visit on a weekend? There's nowhere to park. They're going to walk, and as we've heard, there's no public transport. And so I really have a problem with this, Chairman. And but I'll wait to hear what the rest of the committee say.
Have you finished, thank you?
Yes, thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Yes, I did say it.
Yes, thank you.
I should have said I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. Councillor de Bell.
I feel exactly the same way as the deputy chairman. I think if you look at the flats, they're lovely. There's no problem. I think they're absolutely super. But it hits against something, but I've got a great deal of sympathy for our firemen, especially, and the people living there. It hits against the biggest problem we have in this nation, in this town and in this area, and that is the proliferation of cars. A little bit of history. I mean, when I was a kid back in the 50s and 60s, the average was sort of like one family in 10 perhaps had a car in the 50s, and then it moved up to about one family in 5 or 6. Now, most families have got at least 2 cars, and so there's a proliferation of parking. And when it comes to dealing with planning issues, it's where the 1950s and 40s butts up against the 2020s. And for the future going forward, there has got to be provision for a lot more parking or some way of getting rid of a lot of cars without gluing ourselves to roads and things. I believe that this is the single biggest problem. It ruins villages, it ruins towns. You drive through a lovely village and it's full of cars. And the only big problem you got as a developer is if you create more car parking spaces in a place, you're likely to get people transitioning in there from outside to park their cars there as well, because it is the biggest problem. But somehow or other, in planning terms, we have got to look at this for the future, and the 2020s, 30s, 40s has got to deal with problems going right back to the 40s and 50s. So I've got every sympathy for the gentleman that we're talking about. But the biggest problem, as our planning officers told us, is that under the current rules, we have not got a place to stand on to reject this. And the problem is that it would go to appeal, it would cost a heck of a lot of money, and it would get through. I would say to the developers, you need to look at this. You need to be looking at these things going forward and looking for new ways to deal with this for the people of our country and our town and our area. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to make a plug now. We're in a consultation period for our district plan. And this could be the time that every member puts in their comments regarding that, because this is the one time we could start to influence.
Well said, Chairman.
Yeah, okay. Yes, thank you. Put in that pressure button in a second. Councillor Cartwright.
I must say, when I look at these planning applications, the first thing is I look at the town planning comments, because sometimes they're fairly anodyne. In this case, they're screaming at you.
Well, because he's on there.
Yes, they're screaming at you. And then you look at it, and, it's one of these things where all the boxes are ticked. The ticks are squeezed in for, that they sort of fit. And when you get to the bottom, it all adds up to what looks like a bit of a nonsense. And the reasons, well, they've all been articulated. I mean, I've had difficulty in the past of understanding highways opinions, and I make no comment about it. But in this case, I mean, that it's a large development, single way, one-way traffic, clearly not enough parking spaces. From the map, it looks like you can get some more at the back, but it's on a thinking rate slope. So
Have you seen it?
Yeah, it's, so quite how you do it, I'm not too sure. But I mean, the bottom line is it's a nonsense. And I mean, I've got experience in my ward where I've had over 1,000 houses built. And the plans for those were very logical, and little spaces were left for cars. And now there are people, you know, who've got acute problems, they don't know where to put their cars, and they all, you know, and the thing mushrooms out, and the traffic problems around there are considerable anyway. So I think we are duty bound to take into consideration what people are saying to us, and that the logic of not having sufficient car parking in this area, which looks like a cul-de-sac, and it's going to, over time cause immense problems. And we should take cognizance of that, and that's how you interpret that through the planning rules and the planning laws. I'm not quite sure, but I was uncomfortable with some of the comments made as to why it fitted within the DP requirements. And the obvious point as well is that it has changed since the last application, because I understand we're now talking about 24 flats as opposed to 18.
No, it was 24.
It was
Yeah,
24, was
yeah,
it? Oh,
yeah.
so I picked up
The 2018 was a 24, 2017 was the 18.
I see, yes, okay. But I mean, certainly this is going to make a material impact on the surrounding town. And the materiality of that impact, really we should be taking cognizance of this as well.
Trying to get my brain cells working on this one from 2018, and I think that was the main debate we had, was the parking on there. But like you've just said, highways move in mysterious ways.
Yeah.
And it is probably the biggest single problem that as members who sit around in this chamber and the district planning committee on the parking, we cannot influence what highways do. We try, but we can't. And it is what it is, unfortunately. And Councillor Brown, don't touch it.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wonder if it could be clarified for me. This is the relative timing. I've heard that the Woodside opposite received planning permission, I think early in 2018.
It was March.
Pardon?
March 2018.
Right, okay, spring of 2018. Would it be the case that the construction had actually started, or maybe it hadn't started at all when the committee considered this later in 2018, this previous application?
We were aware of it.
Sure, but it wouldn't have been so apparent. I put it to you. My second point is parking to this extent a material consideration for this committee, or is it something that we have to accept from the county? Thank you.
I'll let Mr. King answer both of those questions. I suspect I know answers to both of them, but let Mr. King, he's the expert.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. In terms of the first question, the committee would have been aware that planning permission had been granted on the site opposite when they considered this site, whether or when it was the block of flats opposite, when that was constructed, doesn't really matter. The fact that once planning permission has been granted, it's got permission and can be implemented. So once a planning permission has been granted there, that would have been part of the history and circumstances when the planning committee then looked at this site. So exactly when it was constructed, that doesn't really make too much difference.
And the parking.
Yeah, the parking, I mean, it is clearly a relevant consideration for the planning committee. It's part of the scheme, it's part of the layout, and all of the issues that flow from the car parking, whether there's an adequate level of car parking, how it's designed, where it is, all of that is relevant, and it's something for the planning committee to take into account in their deliberations. I think that the point that we've said as officers in the committee report is that if you think that there is an inadequate level of car parking, that then has to follow through into some identified planning harm. And when you have the highway authority not raising any objections on highway grounds, on highway safety and or capacity issues, etc., it then becomes very difficult to substantiate that were the application to be refused and go to appeal. And the added difficulty here, again, is that the planning committee, the local planning authority, have found basically the same scheme to be acceptable a few years ago. And the obvious question that I come back to is, what's changed?
Thank you, Mr. King. It is probably our single most issue that all of us grapple with. And I'm looking at the two members over there in East Grinstead, that time we had in East Grinstead. But I'm going to go, two people indicated they wish to come back. I'm going to go to Councillor Sweatman first. I'm going to in a second. Councillor Sweatman hasn't spoken yet. So you've indicated you wish to speak, and I've got you. You will get a chance to. I'm going to go to the two people who have not spoken yet. Councillor Sweatman.
Thank you, Chairman. In fact, Mr. King has actually summed up exactly what I was going to say. This application hasn't changed since we looked at it last time. It is still a material consideration. I understand the concerns of the speakers on parking. I think we all suffer from that, and I can quite understand where they're coming from. However, when we look at planning applications, it's not just a wish list, it's quasi-legal. And what we have to do is to look at the policies and determine it on that, not what we think or what we would like. And for what Mr. King has just mentioned on the car parking issues, the highways are quite happy with that. They have no objection. So, you know, and we all sit on these committees sometimes wondering what highways are doing and throw our hands up in there and think, well, that can't be right. But legally, we've got nowhere to go. So we have to look at policies on and deciding what is planning policy. So I'll leave it there, Chairman. Thank you.
Again, I've got Councillor Forbes who's not spoken yet, so I'm going to ask Councillor Forbes to his comments. Then
thank you, Chairman. What you said earlier on about the consultation period that's out at the moment, I think is a good time. I have actually put in my consultation regarding parking, because if we went on what the problem with the parking, which I totally agree with, we wouldn't have any development in Turner's Hill where I live, because there it is just chaotic. But the point here, as we've just been said, that Highways said there's no problem. And if you go down the planning history, in 2010, it was granted on this site and a small path across the land, that was 3 blocks of flats. 2013, also granted 18 flats. 2017, planning permission granted for 18 flats. April 2019, planning permission for 24, which is in front of us now. So I would find it very difficult for us to turn around and refuse this application. I totally agree with the comments about planning. It is dreadful, and the highways, etc. It's, to me, you're always banging your head against the highways of West Sussex. My bone with them quite often is it'd be nice if they actually come out and see the sites instead of doing an office bound in Chichester. But that's comments for me, Chairman.
thank you very much. Well put. I'm going to allow Councillor Coote to come back first, and then Councillor Brown. So, Councillor Coote.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, paragraph 7 on page 15, it does say, whilst it is clearly a case that each planning application must be determined on its individual merits, it is well established, blah, blah, blah. So we do have an opportunity. My suggestion would be, particularly, and I hope the contractor is listening, he is entering a very difficult period to sell houses and flats. In fact, there are a number of sites that I've recently heard, have gone into hibernation because they can't sell what they've made. So to improve the sellability of these, it would be, the parking is one of those things that I think should be addressed. And I'm wondering, Chairman, if we couldn't defer this, I know we don't like to defer things, but if we could defer it for 1 month so that the contractor can have a serious look at this and come back to us with a modified parking scheme, because I am seriously concerned of the mental situation. We've got a lot of trouble with mental sickness in this country, and if you add to it with neighbours at loggerheads because they can't park their cars, it really, it's our job to see that those things don't happen. So my suggestion would be that we defer it. I don't know what you think, Jim.
All right, thank you, Vice Chairman. To me, that's the easy way out, unfortunately.
Well, then I refuse it.
I
don't want to do that.
It wouldn't be just a month though, would it? It would be a month to come back with a scheme and then have to be re-advertised. We're talking, months down the line. Councillor Sane, sorry, Mr. Councillor Brown. Councillor Sane is now indicated. He wishes to speak.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, my concern is I just want to ask and want to know, what is the binding for providing social housing in any development? What is the minimum houses or flats you require to have social housing? And in this plan, in this development, is there any social housing at all? I wasn't quite clear about it.
There isn't. We get to a stage, and the one which is probably nearest to us now is the one which we granted permission, which has now been implemented opposite around the runway system in Hayward Heath, opposite the Star Pub. What was the old stationery shop. There was no affordable housing there, and again, down opposite Sainsbury's entrance, the NCP car park, there was no social housing there. We have entered into, it was raised concerns at the time, and it's been that we have pressed our officers and they've listened to what we've said, and what they've done is, if you read, it said when it gets to, I'll let Mr. King, I think it's after 18 flats are either sold or leased, we have to, there's a mechanism now that we start to look at. Because I was very upset about the NCP car park, because they wanted more than this, and they said nothing. Pick on.
About aware of it that, in this district, there are a lot of people waiting for housing. And so, any developments, I think should there be available for social housing as well. Otherwise, we would not fulfill the demands. Thank you.
I agree. I can't fault that. But when you visit the site, it's mountain goat territory. If you've visited the site, it's going to require a lot of engineering to pile the site in, and this is the expert next to me for things like that. And that's why we've put a mechanism in, that once it reaches to 18, and then they have to open up all their books for a scrutiny to make sure, and I've got that right legal, haven't I? Yeah. They have to open up the books, and if it does look, there is more money, because regularly we do actually get sites where instead of providing on site, we pool the money, so we can then do a block of flats ourselves, and that's what we do. So the money won't go back to the developer, it will go into a pool to provide the funding stream to make affordable housing. But if we could potentially get 1 or 2 on that site, but again, that will be the mechanism that will be looked at, and that's how it goes. So Councillor Brown, very patient, thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I want to go back to the response I had from Steve King, and it's about the previous decision, the 2018 decision that we've been referred to, and it seems it seems to me that when we assess, when we look, I mean, I'm new to the planning committee, as you well know, but when we look at a site, we look at the site and we don't normally refer to an application on an adjacent site that's just been in March 2018 when this one came forward in December 2018, let's say. So I'm just asking if anybody who was here at that time can cast their minds back and remember whether that was made part of that decision-making process. And do you get my point?
I do get your point, and
Thank you.
it would have been, but I'll get again, Mr. King, and I'll actually get legal to say that we as the planning committee would have been aware of that, and I think Councillor Sweatman, you were vice chairman of the planning committee at that time.
Please don't ask me to remember back then.
No, I'm not going to. But it is material. We would have been known about it, and as always, yes, we're looking at it afresh, but the fact that it's had planning permission for 24 units with 24 parking bits on it before, it just lapsed. They didn't build it out. And the moment that is not extant planning permission, it's not like there's one on there already and it's in time. This is a material consideration. Can I just ask our chief legal officer, sorry, Zach, I'm just bypassing you. I've got that right, haven't we?
You have indeed, Chairman, yes.
Yeah. So it is. Mr. King wishes to come back because, as I've always said, we're here for the difficult ones, and you don't get much more difficult than this.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I was just looking back at the committee report for the 2018 application on this site, and it does refer to the planning permission that had been granted for the block opposite. So it is referred to back in that 2018.
Yeah. So the answer to your question is yes, we were aware of it because he just pulled up the 2018 application. Right. Right. The recommendation A is to recommend that the planning permission is approved, subject to the completion of a satisfactory Section 106 legal agreement to secure infrastructure, affordable housing contributions and conditions set out in Appendix A. Or recommendation B is to recommend that the applicants have not submitted a satisfactory signed planning obligation securing the necessary infrastructure payments and affordable housing, in this case it's the commuted sun, by the 3rd of February 2023, then it's recommended the permission be refused at the discretion of the head of planning. And also the application fails to comply with the policies DP20, DP31 of the Mid-Sussex district plan in respect to the infrastructure and affordable housing requirement to serve the development. In light of that, can I ask members to cast their votes, please?
You haven't got a proposal or a second.
I haven't got a proposer seconder. Can I ask for a proposer and a seconder for this one, please?
I'll propose, Chairman, reluctantly.
Councillor Sweatman, you'll be the seconder?
I'll second that.
Okay, thank you. Now, can we go back to the voting again then? Okay, thank you. Zach, can you read out the...
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Yes, so that's 8 in favour and 1 against. The vote is carried.
Okay, that is approved. But we rest assured that the planning consultant was there and he took on board. And if you can sneak in any more parking, I'm sure they will try it. Thank you, Zach. Could you ask Councillor Pulford to come back in, please? Members, while we're waiting for the changeover for members, there is quite a substantial update on the next item, and it's very important that this is read. Yeah, okay. If you haven't read it before, it is pertinent to this next meeting, the next item. Cheers.
It's quite handy having this here now that you can do that.
Just. Thank you. This is now item 6. This is DM 2241, and this is yours, Catherine. Could you take us through as you sat here patiently for the last one?
Thank you, Chairman. The application is DM 222241 at 53 Washington Road in Haywards Heath. The application seeks planning permission to provide access to the rear of the garden for a disabled resident with a new timber decking area along the rear elevation with access doors and window to replace the existing window, hard standing to the front of the property to provide improved wheelchair movement. Just like to again just raise that there is something on the update sheet regarding the Equalities Act 2010, just outlining the duty of the local authority as the service provider and exerciser of public functions. The application outlined in red here is number 53, is a 2-storey semi-detached property located on the northern side of Washington Road. The properties on the northern side of the highway are at significantly lower level than the highway with a very wide sloping verge. Some of the properties, including the application property, already benefit from off-street parking. The property also has a detached single garage here. Properties on the southern side of the highway are positioned significantly closer on and at a higher ground level than the highway. The property is quite close to the junction with Penn Crescent, which results in different orientations of neighbouring properties and triangular-shaped rear gardens. It's just the block plan showing the additional hard standing to the front, which we're constructing concrete to match the existing driveway and partly extend across the front of the dwelling. The decking here would extend beyond the rear elevation of the existing single-storey rear extension and is outlined in red here. This is the proposed and existing floor plans. So the proposed parking area is just outlined here. The decking to the rear would extend from, as I said, the extension, which is currently a bedroom for the disabled resident. You can see here, you can see the changes to provide an external door. Just also like to note that there is 2 existing side windows that face onto the neighbour, number 51, from the existing extension. The decking would be in line with the side elevation of the extension, 1.5 metres from the existing timber boundary fencing. The proposal has also been amended to include some privacy screening along this eastern side. These are the proposed and existing elevations. You can see the alterations to the window and door. This part of the proposal is solely to the rear of the property and is not considered to have any impact onto the character of the street scene. So you can see that the slope of the land continues to fall away from the rear elevation. So the decking would have a height of approximately 0.7 of a metre from the rear of the extension, which will increase to approximately 0.9 of a metre to the end. The decking would be of a slatted timber screen with some perforation throughout, but it is not considered that this would allow direct overlooking across over the fencing and to number 55 there. These are some of the photos from the application site itself. So the first one is just of the front, and the existing area of hard standing is just here in front of the front door to the property. The next is directly looking at the extension itself. And as you can see, because of the change of levels to the rear, there is a staggered height of the fence panels on both sides, and you can see the separation here with an existing ground floor window to the application property. So this bottom photo here is just orientated towards number 51. The proposed decking would be 1.2 metres from the boundary. And as I pointed out before, there are existing side ground floor windows that face onto this neighbour from the existing extension. And given that the dwelling house is set further to the south at a higher level than the decking, it's considered that the proposal would not cause significant harm to the amenities of this neighbouring property. This other photo at the bottom here is just orientated to number 55, showing the rear elevation. These photos are taken from the garden of number 55. This one is just slightly further down the garden. You can see the rear window already. And then there's the separation. The height of the timber screen, you can see there's a lighter section of bricks here in this corner, and it will just come just underneath that, as it's just below the frame level of the new window and door there. This next one is taken from inside the property with the patio doors, and you would see the timber fencing along this side here, looking down the garden. And then this is just the side on further along with the rear elevation of the neighbour, and again it's filling in approximately this area, this here, seeing it beyond the existing fence line. And same there, you can see the lighter sort of corner of bricks would extend there. The assessment of the impact onto this neighbour set out on pages 80 and 81 of the agenda. Although it's noted that the screening itself would be visible, this is there to prevent any direct overlooking from the decking itself, and there would be some oblique angles from the decking down to the very end of the garden. However, as shown in this photo here, there is some overlooking down to the end of the garden already from the window, and it's considered that, on balance, the proposal would not cause significant harm to the amenities of this neighbour. It is therefore considered that the proposal is acceptable in terms of design, size and scale to the property and the locality, and would not cause significant harm to the amenities of neighbouring properties. Officers consider that the proposal is in accordance with the development plan and is recommended for approval. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Catherine. We do have a speaker, Nick Cooney. You're speaking against it. I take it you're the next door neighbour, are you, Mr. Cooney?
Yes, number 55.
Right, could you put your John Lewis thing
Yes.
next to the dark bit there? Because I think it's easier to put it next to the dark bit. That's what and I assume that's 1.8 metres.
No, this is not quite enough. So the total height where the fence finishes, as it says in the report, will be about 3 metres at the furthest point. This is about 2 metres, this box. If we add another 94 centimetres to the bottom. I wanted to highlight that that's what 3 metres looks like off the ground.
Okay.
Before we begin.
Okay, thank you. Could we, he's not spoken, because he's asked me permission if he could bring that in. I thought it was prudent to have that. So your 2 minutes isn't part of your demonstration.
Thank you. So, thank you for having me. The basic argument that I've got is I'm not sure that all of the arguments presented there are entirely rational. One of the reasons for that is the 3 metre height, I feel, will have a very overbearing impact from the garden. One of the arguments laid out in the committee report was that the garden extends 20 metres in total. The total length of, the extension plus this timber decking will be nearly half the length of the garden. So the overbearing impact will be felt on half the garden, on the widest, most usable part, because the garden itself is triangular. So the bottom half, which isn't suffering from the fence, is a much smaller, less usable piece. In addition to that, the back of the garden where the fence isn't, and there isn't the screening, can be seen quite easily from the decking, which is raised. They say that it's already being overlooked there now from the window, but it'll be much worse when someone's standing there and they can see directly over the fence, because the body height will be roughly in line with that fence. So people will not just be able to look over it, but will be standing essentially over the fence because it's going to be so high because the garden slopes. In terms of the amenity for the disabled resident, I'm not objecting to any other parts of the plan apart from the suspended decking. Access to the garden could be provided with a simple ramp. It's my view that something that tall will have an overbearing impact. I'm not sure how anyone could conclude otherwise, to be honest. And I think that it will cause significant harm to the garden with regards to feeling enclosed, for one, and then not having privacy from the backside, in particular, when the decking's in place. I guess my last point really was, I think that the only reason that it's been proposed in its current format is because...
Could you sum up in one sentence now, please?
Yeah.
Because your 2 minutes is up.
Fine. I think that the reason it's been accepted is essentially to save face, because it was actually the case officers who suggested putting the screen up in the first place following my original privacy concerns, and couldn't now backtrack on it being overbearing.
Okay, thank you. To be fair, Mr. Cooney, that is the officer's job to come up with solutions as well, as opposed to that. Can I ask, in your written submission, it's the last bullet point. Could you just give me and the committee though you haven't mentioned it, I am aware of it, and so is my vice chairman, about the judicial review.
So if it's accepted...
No, hang on a second. No, you can't. No, I'm going to get the legal officer. They're the ones who are going to make that decision. I'm aware of it, my vice chairman is, and as are the planning officers, and I think it's only right that we will share your paragraph 7.
Thank you, Chairman. I think that's very much a planning question for a decision for the planners and decision makers to make. I don't think normally the court would sort of step into what would constitute that. So I think that's for the planners to take a view on.
Yeah, Mr. King's going to step into that one. Sorry, Mr. King. If you want to read it out first, and then what you feel.
Yeah,
it's
thank
only
you,
in
Chairman.
number 7, paragraph 7.
Yeah, so just so the Chairman wants the committee to be aware, bullet point 7 in Mr. Cooney's speech says, I hope the committee agrees that the current plan would cause me significant harm as I'm confident a court would in a judicial review. And just for I'm sure members are fully aware of all of this, but any decision that the planning committee makes, any planning permission that's granted or refused, if an interested party thinks that that decision has been arrived at in an unlawful way, they can seek to have that decision reviewed by way of a judicial review in the courts. That has to be done within 6 weeks, or an application has to be made to the court within 6 weeks of the decision being made. But the courts don't get involved in planning judgments about the merits of planning permissions. They expressly don't get involved in that. The courts are there to look at whether there's been procedural irregularities in how a decision's been arrived at. So has a policy been clearly misapplied, or has a policy not been referred to at all? Has something relevant not been brought before the committee's attention? It's those sorts of procedural things. Or is a decision so perverse, so irrational, that no rational person could possibly have made it? But the courts are there to look at the legality of the decisions rather than getting into the ins and outs of planning merits of a decision. Chairman.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. King. Can't have that one back. That's why I asked you to read the update sheet, because it's an important consideration as well. Right, Councillor Forbes, you're first.
Thank you, Chairman. I've got no difficulty with this at all. I mean, it's access to a rear garden for a disabled resident. Obviously, could have whatever everybody else says here, but I was moved as recommended, please.
Councillor Coote.
Well, Chairman, some many years ago, I joined the Cheshire Home at Copthorne as a volunteer. And the first thing they did with me was to say, sit in that wheelchair and don't get out of it until you're told. And I was in the wheelchair for over an hour. And I then realised how difficult life is for disabled people. And so this, as far as I'm concerned, I can't see a problem with this, apart from the fence is a little bit high. Well, if they don't like the fence high, let's cut it down a bit. But you can't stop a disabled person having access to the garden. I just think it's, you know, it's not unneighbourly. And so therefore I would support Councillor Forbes' recommendation. I will second it, Chairman.
Thank you. It's just that when if you go to in our report, I'll go to Councillor Brown in a second. We had a letter from yourself regarding it, and then the proposed decking was put in, and then we had some more re-advertised, is that correct?
Yes. So the proposed screening itself would require permission in its own right, so we re-advertised the application, and given that it was also raised, the concerns were raised about the proposal as a whole, we re-advertised it for comments for third parties as well as the town council as well.
Okay, thank you. Well, town council didn't make any comments. Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Chairman. I have sympathy with the applicant in a disabled situation, finding themselves in that situation. I've also some sympathy with the adjacent householder. I'm noting that this partition that's being added is very high, and I know in Haywards Heath there was substantial fencing blown down in last Sunday, and it happened to my son, in fact. This petition is, of course, on the applicant's side, so they might not maintain it. You know, it might blow down, it's very high. Also, looking at the depth of this extension, it's down the garden, I think 4.8 metres or something like that. It seems far more than is really absolutely necessary for the disabled person to enjoy the garden and to access the house. And I know it's not our job to redesign applications, but I think there are other solutions here. So I don't feel that this is reasonable. I have sympathy with the objector. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Councillor Brown. Councillor de Bell.
I think there is. I don't believe there's anybody in this room that would not want to support a disabled person, and in the full details of this, that is not what I've heard here today. But I do have concerns, as I understand it. Can we go back a space to have a look at where the actual decking will be, please, if we can, Catherine? Because I've heard that there might be some sort of a better way that would, because I'm concerned that we're going to finish it with animosity between neighbours here, and nobody wants that. But as I understand it, the fence is not going to be increased. It's just where the decking's going to be, and where the person will be able to, this lovely person is going to be able to enjoy that decking. And what I've heard is that that's what everybody wants, but does it have to be so high, as Councillor Brown said? I wonder if there might be some sort of a better way that will suit both parties, for the joy of everybody, you know. That's my thoughts. Thank you.
Eloquently put. We can only deal with what we've got in front of us, but saying that, I'm sure that once construction of the decking, I'm only putting words in your mouth, and I shouldn't do, but I'm sure that the applicant and the resident next door can come to some sort of arrangement. As long as we give planning permission for the principle of the fence, yeah, then some sort of height variance. They don't have to build it to that height. They just can't build it higher.
All right.
So they don't have to build it that high, but we have to give planning permission for something which allows that. So I'm sure there'll be some sort of, I can't say one way or another because I'm not the applicant, but they can build up to that height. Yeah. They don't have to build that height. Yeah. That's correct, isn't it? Councillor, Councillor, you're not a councillor. Yeah. Mr. King, sorry. Don't want to demean you there.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I think it's important to just clarify that the committee have to deal with the application that's before you, and if you think that this application is acceptable with the decking as it is and the proposed screening, privacy screen at that height, then you should vote to approve it. If you don't think that's the case, if you think there's harm and it's significant harm and it warrants a refusal, then you should vote to refuse it, because if a planning permission is granted, then the applicants can build what they've got consent for, and the committee have accepted that is appropriate, and you will have approved it. So I think you've just, if you don't think that fencing is appropriate, then you shouldn't be voting in favour, because you know, if you want to defer for further negotiations, again, and that's an option that's open to you, but I wouldn't say vote for approval on the basis that the applicants might change the height of the fencing when they start constructing it, because if they get permission, they could build it up to that height.
Okay. So what I'm saying now is then, the fact that it's come to the committee for determination, I don't like deferrals, but I think that perhaps the fact that it's come this far, and it will come back to us again, that perhaps some more consultation between neighbours, maybe.
Just very, very brief.
Yeah, go on.
Can I, would it be possible to make, to approve this and make some sort of a recommendation that they kind of look at the height together or something like that?
No, we can't do that.
Okay.
We
Thank
can
you very
only-
much, Chairman.
Yeah.
To deal with what we've got.
We can only deal with what we've got in front of us. But I don't normally like deferrals, but I do think the fact that we've got to this stage could actually now clarify the mind of the applicant and clarify the, what is acceptable, because something's got to be there, because in light of and the reason why I read it out was because on the first concerns, it was impact from privacy, so they went back to try and address that, and then it became unacceptable because it's too damn high. So I think the fact that it's come here could actually then perhaps have a degree of consultation between the neighbours. I'm not saying it's going to happen, and it's well within the rights of the applicant to come back in what we've got in front of us again. But you haven't spoken yet, Councillor Cartwright.
No, I was just making the point that looking at it, maybe the screening at wheelchair height would be adequate rather than the screening which seems to allow to stop people standing up overlooking.
Yeah.
But again,
From what I understand, that the poor girl who is seriously disabled needs to be pushed out.
right.
So there would always going to be an adult stuck at the other end of the wheelchair.
But would the adults remain
don't
standing
know.
behind the chair while she was
I think the idea is the poor child is housebound
Yes,
at this
of
point
course,
in
yeah.
time. And that's the idea of the decking to get around that.
Yeah.
So I don't think we can say, lady, you've got to go back in again, or husband, you've got to go back in again. So I don't normally agree with deferring, but I think that in this case, it might be the best course to do it. But then I'm in the committee's hands. If you don't say yay or nay and go with what we've got in front of us, I'm happy to go with that one as well.
I would propose deferring, Chairman.
I do think that, well, Councillor Sweatman,
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, what members might say, but personally, I'll be in favour of approving this application as it stands.
yeah, well, I'm afraid that's where I'm coming from, but I can see where the others are coming from. But we can deal with what we've got in front of us. So the application is recommended for approval. I've got a proposer and a seconder. And the recommendation is that planning permission be approved subject to conditions outlined in Appendix A. Can we now start the voting, please?
I wanted to speak. Sorry about that.
Oh, did you?
So, I nearly broke it.
I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, I think we've got all people who voted. Zach, can you,
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, that's 7 in favour, 3 against, the vote is carried. The application is approved.
that application is approved, and I'm sure the applicant would, if they're watching on YouTube, will take on board what we've just said. Thank you. Yeah, please. It won't fit in my car. Oh, no, cheers, Catherine, thank you.
This one, I think we can do with recommended.
Well, we got,
Oh, no. There's not a fire.
we have got an objection, so we'll have to debate it, yeah. Well, you can well, it's actually a ground floor site.
There's plenty of room there.
Of course there is.
As I said, they are premium, there must be.
are you all set up, ready to go? Right, Joe? This is item 7 on the agenda list. It's DM 221307, and this is Joe Swifts, our planning officer, who's going to take us through this one, please.
We have no updates in the update sheet, but I'm afraid that the Linfield Parish Council's full comments were not in an appendix, so I'm just going to read them out for members so they're aware of that. The comments are as follows. Recognising both the precedents set historically alongside current policy, Linfield Parish Council object to the latest unsuitable proposal for this site. It is perhaps worth considering the previous applications for this site and Linfield Parish Council's responses, specifically 11/00889/FUL, 11/02624/FUL, and 14/03955/FUL. In summary, Linfield Parish Council recognises that this is a brownfield site, ex-builder's yard. It is very suitable for a small-scale housing development, but that this needs to be undertaken appropriately. Such development should respect the requirements of DP26 and the area of townscape character designation within the Linfield and Linfield Rural Neighbourhood Plan. The latest proposal for 2 semi-detached houses conflicts with the policy requirements in respect of the character and scale of the surrounding buildings and landscape, as well as does not cause significant harm to the amenities of existing nearby residents. Recognising impact on the bungalow in Chestnut Close at the rear, the previous applications mentioned saw the initial application for the semi-detached houses withdrawn, followed by 2 reduced scale proposals being approved, as they were better respected the location and neighbouring properties. It is obviously important any development is constructed recognising the area of townscape character and uses appropriate matching materials. Further, access to the site is quite tight, and Linfield Parish Council would ask that highways authorities carefully consider whether the proposal meets the appropriate standards, in particular number of spaces provided for the proposed properties, the ability for vehicles to turn around the site and where all spaces are occupied, and rejoin the highway safely travelling in the forwards gear, as well as the safety of pedestrians and other road users. This application is seeking consent for a pair of semi-detached 4-bedroom dwellings to the rear of 67 Santee Avenue. The application site is shown here outlined in red. The proposal will utilise the existing access, which runs between number 67 and number 65 Santee Avenue. The site is a brownfield site within the built-up area boundaries. It is currently used as a builder's yard and has been since 1946. And its historic use has no restrictions on terms of hours of use. The site plan here shows the layout of the 2 dwellings. They will have parking for 4 to 6 cars along the frontage. And each will have a rear garden. Due to the dogleg nature of the site, the right-hand property will have a slightly larger garden. It is considered that both dwellings would have sufficient amenity space and it would not be considered an overdevelopment of the site. The dwellings would have a back-to-back distance from the properties on Chestnut Close of approximately 28 metres and would also be approximately 41 metres from number 65 and 67 Santee Avenue to the front. It is considered that these relationships have not caused significant harm to the neighbouring amenities. The proposed elevations show the design of the dwelling. They would have a mixture of facing brickwork on the ground floor and on the sort of side and rear elevations, with tile hanging on the first floor front elevation. The proposal would result in the removal of a number of existing flat-roofed storage buildings, and it was considered to have been overall improvement to the character and appearance of the area. Here we can see the proposed floor plans. Each unit will be laid out with a kitchen and dining room, utility room, and a lounge on ground floor with 4 bedrooms, bathroom and ensuite at first floor. The proposed dwellings would comply with the National Dwelling Space Standards. For context, there has, in terms of the planning history on the site, there was a previous approval for chalet bungalows on this site. As you can see from the site plan, it's utilising same access and parking arrangement. It's worth noting as well that the proposed dwellings are identical to the height of the approved chalet bungalows. They have been designed with a crown pitch roof to keep a similar height. And here we have some photos of the site. The first 2 are from Sante Avenue and also from the access road looking into the site, as you will get limited views of the proposed development from the main public viewpoints along Sante Avenue. The next photo is looking north from the application site, and this is looking towards number 65 Sante Avenue. And the second photo here is looking towards number 67 Sante Avenue. The third photo is at the rear of the existing storage buildings, and it's a fence between the site boundary and the properties to the rear of Chestnut Close. And the final photo is just to show you the existing buildings. They're a single story and not of any particular architectural merit. The proposal would result in the removal of an unrestricted and inappropriately located builder's yard, and the proposal would provide 2 dwellings on a brownfield site within the built-up area boundaries of Linfield. The proposal is considered to be of appropriate design, size and scale. It is in keeping with both the wider character and that of the area of townscape character. The resulting relationships are not considered to cause significant harm to the neighbouring amenities, and the proposal was also considered acceptable in relation to access and parking, drainage, contamination, dwelling space standards, Ashtown Forest and sustainable construction. The application is therefore recommended for approval, subject to the conditions outlined in Appendix A. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Joseph. We do actually have a speaker who's not here, so in accordance with our standing orders, our legal officer is going to read it out. He will be subject to the 2 minutes, and the letter is against. It's Kitty Gilliver, and it's going to be read out by Mr. Moynihan. Moynihan, should I? Yep, if you want to start.
Unfortunately, we are unable to attend this meeting in person. As owners of 67 Sante Avenue, Linfield, we wish to strongly object to this proposed planning application of land at 67A Sante Avenue on the following grounds: significant impact and loss of outlook. Previous lapsed planning application was for two chalet bungalows, which was granted due to the fact that the land is significantly higher than that of adjoining properties. The previous application for 2-story building was withdrawn. Due to height of land and positioning, properties built on this land would significantly impact outlook from our property and those surrounding us. The 2nd story of the proposed properties would directly overlook our garden, cutting out light and afford us no privacy in our garden. The front 2nd story windows of said proposed properties will look directly into our bedroom, again affording us no privacy. Volume of traffic, noise and possible impact as a result of the actual building of said properties is visited below. Effect on wildlife. We share a brick wall along the entire length of our garden, on which we have established raised beds, wired electricity, lights and power, which have been in situ for over 20 years. In addition to this, we have a large concrete pond with a variety of different breeds of newts and established wildlife. If this wall is to be affected in any way during construction, i.e. dust and vibration of building removal, etc., it will impact wildlife and our garden hugely and potentially at great cost to us and the environment we have created here. we need to understand how our property will be affected, especially when there is a mention of demolition of outside toilet to create further living space.
Right, thank you. You did very well to get as far as you did. You've been practicing. Members, this is a brownfield site, and as part of our district plan, we wish to make use of brownfield sites. And as the plan officer just mentioned, that the roof ridge is identical to what we've got now. So, Councillor Sweatman.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, quite rightly what you just said. This is a brownfield site. Previous permission has been given for chalet-type bungalows, and as you just said, so it's the same height as what was proposed.
Yeah.
So we've got recommend approval.
Okay, you're going to propose that?
I will propose that.
Councillor Forbes.
Thank you, Chairman. I would just make comments on the fact is that Water and Access Manager says he wants evidence. If you go on page 104, he says, I wanted to know if actually had a reply to this. Having viewed the plans for the planning application for a proposed pair of 4-bed semi-detached dwellings on the land, evidence is required to show sufficient turning facilities are provided for fire appliances to turn and make their exit. A fire appliance should not need to reverse more than 20 metres to make an exit. Have you had a reply from?
Good question.
And also,
oh, sorry, carry on.
Again, we never seem to ask, would the refuse have to be taken to the main road, or would they be able to get down? The same reason they wouldn't be able to turn round?
Yeah,
Okay,
you're on.
am I good to go? Yeah. I have, in terms of the fire appliance access, it would fall under a building control matter, because when it comes to the application, they would again consult with the fire and access manager. So they would either require them to put in a sprinkler system or to have put in a hydrant at the building control stage. So it's considered that would be a building control matter at that point. And just to highlight as well in terms of the bins, it's not quite clear on the image here, but I'm just highlighting that there is a bin collection point that will be provided right at the front of the site, so that the bin vehicle will not have to drive down the access. They'll be able to collect it from the front of the site.
So both houses will have to take their bins right up to the main road?
Yes.
And leave them on the pavement?
No, there's a bin collection area there, you just said.
Up the,
yeah.
Take my business far every day.
Yeah, so do I. Councillor Coote.
I was going to second the proposal, Chairman.
Okay.
What was recommended, because I can't see anything wrong with it. It's a brownfield site, that's it.
Yeah, it's not back garden development, which on the look at it first, you start thinking it. So the application is recommended for approval. I have a proposer and a seconder, Councillor Sweatman and Councillor Coote. It's recommended the application to be approved subject to conditions set out in Appendix A. Can I get members to vote, please? Right, I think that's everybody.
Thank you, Chairman. That's in favour. Unanimous, and the vote is carried. The application is approved.
That application has been approved. Items recommended for refusal, I have none. Questions pursuant to Council Procedure Rule 10.2 due notice which I've been given, I have none. And can I will close the meeting, but before I do, can members just remain in situ before we switch off the live stream? So I classed that at 6:15.